Hey, Brittany, are we ready to go? Thumbs up.
Yes, you're live, Jeff.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the fourth FOR Riverside Chat. Thanks for joining us. This one's going to be a little bit different from the ones that you've seen before. We're going to be looking more to future efforts and challenges that we're trying to deal with. You're going to be meeting people and technologies that I suspect you've not previously thought about, but could be the basis for serious positive change in and around rivers and the world of water. Think of it as using 21st century solutions and technologies rather than the historic 19th century solutions we've typically been fighting and worked against, such as dams and channels. We've got an awesome group of founders and entrepreneurs here from the startup world. They've all been part of a San Francisco-based water incubator called Imagine H2O that works both domestically and globally. They've got chapters in Asia as well, and have been bringing forward some incredible technologies that are going to be really useful downstream, particularly in the face of climate change. So people saw it recently, there's a series going on right now in the New York Times talking about how water is going to be such a scarce resource that people are going to be migrating for it. Arguably, the Iraq War was over water. So historically, FOR is focused on protecting and restoring California's rivers and securing wild and scenic status. And we've always punched way above our weight. These startups are trying to do the exact same thing in around various aspects of water. And hopefully we can accelerate each other's ability to do that, and it'll be symbiotic. Climate change is obviously changing everything, and it's forcing us at FOR to kind of do an aperture change, kind of backing out and not doing strictly protecting and restoring rivers in the defensive sense like we have in the past, but looking at what are other pressures ultimately on rivers, and so that we can do a better job of balancing the competing interests that exist in the environment for rivers, critters, and people, as well as municipalities, computers, Silicon Valley's need for ultra clean water, residential, and the ultimate heavyweight, which is ag. And that encompasses everything from corporate to organic and now regenerative. You may remember that we honored Full Belly Farms, which is a really innovative organic farm up in the Capay Valley a couple of years ago. So when we're thinking bigger about this and thinking about water use beyond rivers, it's all about taking pressure off the rivers. So we're looking at how water cycles actually happen now and how they're changing now that there's not as much snowpack. What are the uses and our needs that are changing, how science can impact it, economics and policy. So one of my pet peeves is the fact that we're, depending on whose numbers you use, exporting between 8 and 13% of our water in the form of alfalfa, which is a relatively low value crop and something that can basically be grown anywhere. So how users rethink the need in their use of water, which means moving into areas that we, as I said previously, haven't occupied in and may not be particularly comfortable in. But we're going to gain some new allies to be more effective, and we need to gain credibility in the area as well, building on what we did in Sacramento back in May of 19, which Oriana and Aaron, who are with us today, were both part of. And that day, I'm going to space his name, but we had the leader of the Senate out there looking at the different technologies that were on display, and there were 12 different startups there. So as we go forward into the next 50 years for Friends of the River, we're looking at revolutionizing water, how we can catalyze change, basically going on offense, continuing to save threatened rivers and protecting them, the work that we've historically done on defense. Also looking at urban rivers and how we can help revitalize those and go for water equity, and then expanding the community that's interested in it. So for most people, I think it's safe to say that their relationship with water basically wraps around, I turn the spigot on in the kitchen or the bathroom, and hopefully water is going to be there and it's going to be clean. So on the revolutionizing piece of this, that particular leg, startups are going to be a big piece of it, and it's where the action is going to be. And one way to think of startups is like FOR, where we punch above our weight and take on entrenched interests. That's exactly what startups are doing on an ongoing basis. So we'll hear how and why these entrepreneurs decided to focus on water, what segments they're operating in, and how they're treating it, what dreams and challenges that they're going up against, and the proverbial what keeps them up at night. And so for why startups, Ravi, who's also a water entrepreneur and also on the board, will jump in and explain that in a little bit more detail now.
Thank you, Jeff. My name is Ravi. I'm also an FOR board member. And just a little kind of primer on startups for people that are really not familiar with kind of how they work, what they have to go through. I myself also am a water entrepreneur and have founded a startup called Sutro. And I've also gone actually through Imagine H2O, like many of the founders that you'll hear today. A really interesting thing is startups are actually very similar to nonprofits, even though you may not think of them in that particular way. One, they're usually underfunded and usually working with super limited resources to actually accomplish really big world-changing things that should be worked on. And as Jeff mentioned, they're usually always punching above their weight by kind of disrupting the larger players that they're either trying to carve out a new market or take them over. The third is they're trying to help market constituents see things through a different lens, right? They're seeing problems in the world and they're figuring out solutions on actually how they can shift that to actually help people move in the right direction. And VCs or venture capitalists usually will invest in startups because they see a vision of a new world after the startup has established itself. And very similarly, donors donate to nonprofits because they value the work that nonprofit is doing. And so kind of with that, that's kind of setting the stage for just revisiting why kind of we're all here at the table, what's the kind of interest of FOR with the startups that we have here on the panel today. And with that, actually, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Aaron from Epic Cleantech. We're going to go and do kind of a quick 3 to 4 minute introduction from each startup, kind of including what issues and water problems you're actually solving. With that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Aaron.
Great. Thank you, Ravi. Thank you, Jeff. It's a pleasure to be with the FOR board. It's an organization that I'm now getting acquainted with. And thank you all for the work that you do day in and day out for the state, which frankly I think is a model for the country.
Aaron, you're getting weird feedback on the mic.
How's this?
A little bit better. It's still popping.
Robbie, why don't we go to someone else and let me fix it?
You're good.
That actually sounded perfect.
Yep.
Perfect. All right. Well, just to recap, I was just saying some nice glowing words about FOR. Those remain true in my clear microphone now. So a little bit about Epic Cleantech. We are what we say decentralizing wastewater treatment and reuse into buildings or into groups of buildings starting in cities. So what that means is essentially when it comes to how we design our cities, when it comes to water infrastructure and when it comes to wastewater infrastructure, for about 200 years, we've been doing things effectively the same way, which is to mean we go from buildings, then we send all of our wastewater into sewers, then off to centralized treatment plants. And the approach has worked well. But with all of our pipes put in anywhere from 30 to 100 years ago, all of our facilities were similarly designed around World War II. All of these things simply can't keep up with urban population growth. You know, the statistics we hear all the time, about 70% of the world's population living in cities by 2050, the way we're designing things simply can't keep up with more and more people moving into cities. So at Epic Cleantech, what we've actually done is we were born out of initial work with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. They had something called the Reinvent the Toilet Challenge. And the basic premise of that challenge was billions of people worldwide don't have access to clean water or reliable sanitation. Most places around the world don't have the ability to build out the complicated underground sewer infrastructure that we take advantage of and frankly take for granted in cities like San Francisco or San Diego or LA or in many of the cities we all live in. So the Great Foundation said, let's design above ground decentralized solutions for these populations. So we actually were working designing toilets for the Gates Foundation. And then we said, well, let's take the innovations that we've developed and scale them up into buildings. Let's go into cities where, frankly, I think cities can be the catalyst for innovation on a number of fronts, not just water, wastewater. So at Epic Clean Tech, what we're basically doing is we're saying, look, we don't need to take fresh water from our national parks and from Hetch Hetchy to flush our toilets in downtown San Francisco. We can be manufacturing water on site within these buildings for things like flushing toilets or cooling towers or for irrigation or even for laundry, which frankly, most of the functions of water in a commercial building or in a residential building are going to be for non-drinking uses anyways. And so I think the we have an amazing technology where we're taking all of this wastewater in the buildings, producing both fertilizer as well as clean water that can be recycled onto the building, back into the building. But I think for the purposes of this conversation, what I'll just say, and maybe we'll get into later, is that it's not just the technology alone that's important. It's on working with the legislators, working with the regulators to introduce a new concept. When it, with energy, I'm not going to say it's simple, but with energy, introducing new appliances is generally not going to be as big of a push as to introduce innovations into water and wastewater where you're dealing with implications of public health. If something goes wrong with what we're doing, people are going to get sick. So it's a different level of understanding, but I don't want to go over my time and talk too much now, but all I'll say is that, we at Epic Clean Tech, we basically think that we are in a position now to fundamentally rethink how cities are going to be designing for the future so that we can be, where most people are living, can reuse our resources more effectively to make sure that we're always going to have water for all the different other functions in a state like California. So maybe I'll pause there, Ravi.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Aaron. Next, we're going to head over to Ariana, the founder and CEO of Aquacycle.
Great, thanks. Great to be here with y'all tonight, and I'm glad I got to follow Epic Clean Tech because we're doing a very similar approach of a decentralized structure, but we focus specifically in industrial applications. So while the Epic Clean Tech is focused on cities and human waste, we're looking at waste which is anywhere from 100 times to 1,000 times more concentrated in carbon than what you see in a commercial or residential building sewer. And so what we do is an energy neutral solution. It's a plug and play modular system. It sits on a corporate site. So we work with mostly food and beverage companies like Coca-Cola, Pepsi-Cola, Nestle, Mars Wrigley, Anheuser-Busch. All of these folks generate very high strength wastewaters, typically have to be managed differently than sent to a city sewer. Or if they do send to a sewer, they're charged an entirely different class of rates because of these concentrations. The centralized treatment plants have such a difficult time handling it. They have to charge them in their own weight class, upgrade the infrastructure, do something specifically for this industry so that toxicity issues don't occur in the centralized plants. So when we're in play, what we do is we treat that really high, ultra high strength wastewater on site. We recover power as DC electricity. Most energy recovery systems that treat wastewater right now produce methane, which of course is a greenhouse gas. It can be captured and burned in the process of cogeneration for electricity and heat. However, about 30% of that gas still gets flared off directly into the environment. So we bypass that whole process and we make DC power. We trickle charge a battery pack on site, and we can run our systems off the battery pack. And in some cases, we're actually net positive, so we can offset some of the plant requirements on energy as well. So we have been demonstrating this technology with food and beverage partners and how we fit into the grand scheme. And I think all of us here probably follow the same theme that all water is one water, right? And that's been a mantra within the water industry. But when you're talking about wastewater, whether you're talking about drinking water, whether it's ocean or river water, it is all part of the same cycle. And so we're trying to fit in a part of this cycle so that we can enable water reuse on site, similar to Epic Clean Tech. We require partner technologies to make drinking water available, or HVAC or boiler water available back to the company. But we can handle all of the reject from membrane filtration or reverse osmosis. So we're cleaning that up. We're making sure that that doesn't get discharged to the environment, and really helping to promote a circular economy and to improve water stewardship throughout these industrial applications. So we're super excited to move forward. Some of our first installations are here in California with some big food and beverage players. And so we're ready to make an impact and work with our partners here, some of whom are going to tell you some great stories tonight, you know, get that reuse story really in line, because it is all one water.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ariana. Next up, we're going to have Matt Rosenthal, who is the CEO and co-founder of SewerAI.
Thanks, Ravi. Hi, everyone. At SewerAI, we are developing AI tools and data management platform to try to lower the cost of sewer maintenance. And really, we're working on this because the costs of maintaining sewer systems are really astronomical. We haven't been investing as a country in maintaining these systems. They're failing pretty alarmingly. You know, 860 billion gallons of raw sewage overflows out of our sewer systems into our rivers and cities and oceans every year. So we are trying to build software and tools that enables cities and contractors to handle this problem much more cost effectively. I have a slide here that kind of really shows in, they say it's worth 1,000 words. I think I'll just show it real quickly. This is how sewer inspections are done today. You have a very expensive crew driving a box truck out to a manhole, lowering a camera down in there, and then manually driving this camera around a sewer pipe looking for all kinds of defects. It's incredibly slow, very expensive, inefficient, subjective. It's very expensive. And we are developing AI technologies that automates, you know, a big portion of this process to make it go much faster and therefore much lower cost. Yeah, that's what we're doing. And we think that, you know, by being able to lower the cost, lower the cost of sewer maintenance, that cities will be able to do a much better job of maintaining their sewers, decreasing overflows, and just, you know, providing a better level of service to their residents. Thanks.
Amazing. Thank you, Matt. Lastly, we're going to go to Aaron, who is the founder and CEO of Storm Sensor.
Hi. So as Matt, I think, just made really clear, we're not managing our stormwater or our sewage very well, and it's causing some pretty significant economic and environmental costs. So what we do at Storm Sensor, we basically, so Matt's company maps what's happening within the pipes, like at the actual pipes themselves, whereas we map the water moving through these systems. So we're looking at stormwater, sewer, and coastal systems. We work with cities across the country to understand what's happening within these pipes. So we're looking at backups, overflows, which is the raw sewage flowing into the waterways. We're looking at urban flooding and a number of different issues. And there are three main use cases that we work on. The first is flood control. So in order to properly implement flood control within our communities, we need to really understand the locations, the frequencies, the causes, and the sources of urban flooding, as well as storm surges and surface water flooding as well. So that includes both sea level and water level rise. The second aspect that we work on is critical infrastructure. The bulk of our sewer and stormwater infrastructure far exceeds its useful age, as well as the capacity that was built to handle. So measuring how water moves through the system, where it comes from, how much can be moved, where it goes, what's causing the backups, helps prioritize fixes and retrofits that cities have to implement. And then the third major use case is stormwater model validation, because it's so important to validate the models that we use with real data, because even when our infrastructure meets the modeled requirements, cities often experience massive flooding well within design storm standards. And we're seeing that with the data that we're capturing, water's actually moving through these pipes 3 to 8 times slower than modeled, which means that we are seeing consistent and regular backups even during relatively light rain events. And we do this using our sensors. So our Scoot sensors, we have a terrapin network. I don't know if everyone knows this, but a terrapin is basically a type of turtle. And a scoot is a turtle shell, a scale in a turtle shell. So we have scoots that comprise our terrapin network. So it's a nerdy version of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Anyhow, so our sensors monitor temperature, flow, and weather data every 5 minutes at every monitoring point every day. And then we pull that together to provide our customers with notifications and insights, because the point of what we're really doing is to build really simple, practical algorithms and insights that allow cities to get the information that they need to measure, monitor, and manage the risks that they are facing on a daily basis, in many cases from flooding, tidal surges, and overflows. And then they use these insights to streamline operations, receive real-time system diagnostics, and these are highly variable systems, and then also guide future investments in capital improvements while proving the value of previous investments. And this covers everything from green infrastructure and retention basins to gray infrastructure and additional pipes. That's it.
Awesome, Aaron. Thank you so much. Next up, I'm going to actually hand it over to Jeff to open up the kind of moderator-assisted QA process. And we'll go from there, as technical as I can make that sound.
Let's bring everybody back up. The object is to have this be conversational. So I'll point to one of you to lead, but then everybody jump in. And as long as Erin was just talking, she can keep going. So to get your technology launched and adopted, because this is really a radical change from what people have done, what are the obstacles that you've been running into to get people to do something so new and different and understand the impact it can have on their existing systems?
Well, for us, part of it is fear to try something new because they're using taxpayer dollars, so they have to make the right decision and not waste money. And then the implications of some of the findings that we develop with them are pretty significant as well. So they want to ensure that the data that we're capturing are as accurate and as good as our competitors. So there's that aspect of it. Another thing that we deal with is that, so we do networks of sensors, like 20 or 30 in a relatively small area. Our customers are used to installing a sensor that covers an entire basin, then you extrapolate out from there over months and years based on a month or two's worth of data, and then over several miles. So then getting over that hump of not just one sensor, but actually being able to meter the storm system like you meter any other utility has been an interesting challenge. I'd say those are two of the main ones: trust, risk, and then why would we do something different if we've been doing something for the last 50 years and it's probably fine?
How do you?
It runs across water.
Right.
I was going to say, so trust is a problem. How do you combat? What is your answer to that?
So we, especially, well, you guys all know as a startup, being super honest as far as our stage and what could go wrong, and that we are developing new features and we do want to try new things, has been really critical to us because, you know, we've been working with a couple customers now that our technology is dialed in. It took almost 2 years of working in the field with customers to get some of this stuff fixed. And they needed to know that things were not going to be 100% perfect because we're startups and everything breaks when you start this stuff, especially when you're in hardware, and water and sewage. And then constant communication. So we want to make sure that we catch the problems before our customers see it on our software, because if they see it first, then their first reaction is like, oh my God, everything's broken and this isn't working. We totally wasted our time and our money. Whereas we say, we're like, look at what we found and this is how we're fixing it. They're automatically calmed instantly, and then we get them all excited about the opportunities that we found as a result of finding an error, and this is what we get to try next time, and are they willing to do this or that and anything else, and then they get excited to try other things too, and it's been fun. But I would say communication and complete total honesty, maybe not 100% total honesty in some cases, really, but about as honest as is realistic. to meet their expectations and then ultimately exceed them.
Anybody
Yeah,
else?
I'll jump in and just add, Jeff, you mentioned at the outset sort of this notion that we take for granted that when we turn the tap on, water comes out. And I'm sure for a lot of the folks involved with Friends of the River, a lot of your friends know that this is something you care about and you're involved with. But Jeff and Ravi, they like water. That's what they do. But most people never really think about water. At Epic, we like to talk about something that we call the flush and forget attitude, which is that we never think about what happens after we flush the toilet. We never think about, if water's going to come out when we turn on the tap. And that's essentially that attitude has permeated why we're in the situation that we are today, where we've had decades of infrastructure essentially deteriorating under our feet. Because if you're going to get elected to office and you're a politician, it's a lot sexier to get up on stage and say, I'm going to fix the parks and the schools and the libraries, than I'm going to dig up your sewers, mess up your morning commute, and frankly, who wants to deal with sewers? So I think we deal with the fact that there's, when we're dealing with private real estate developers and architects and engineers, this is a topic they simply never ever grapple with. And frankly, when they do hear about sewage and water issues, it's usually not good news. Usually something bad has happened. And so we're contending with that. And frankly, I think for those of us dealing with sewage, and for Matt, he actually has sewer in his name, there's a yuck factor. There's a reluctance to even want to go anywhere near this issue. And for us, we're coming in saying, we're going to go into your 40-story high-rise with 754 residential luxury units and put in a sewage recycling system into the basement. It could go wrong, but probably won't. It's tough, and that's what we have to contend with. But it is about the science and the technology. And, we can't take the same levels of risk that software companies do. I think Mark Zuckerberg had the famous move, quick and break things. We can't do that. We can't afford to break things because people can get hurt or cause serious liability issues. But it's about the science, and there's a huge education component about educating people about a topic, which they never really think about almost ever.
And behavior change, because not everything should go down the drain. And so, and then that can be disruptive. And those are things that we have to plan for. Rags, we've got, flushable wipes, not flushable, stop flushing. Right. And, and so managing our city sewers is not just infrastructure, but also behavior, because we're always coming up with some new product that makes our lives convenient in the home. And that always winds up either in the trash or the drain. And that can be really problematic for existing infrastructure, but also an innovation opportunity for removal.
So given a lot of our audience really cares about the protection and restoration of rivers, can you help them better understand the alignment between what you're doing and as you're talking to water professionals, how they think about new water coming into the system and then the discharge that you're dropping back into rivers and how that plays in their decision-making? And Matt, go for it.
Thanks. So, the way we look at it, like inflow and infiltration is a big problem in terms of overloading, treatment plants and then causing sewer overflows into, rivers, essentially. So we see, what we're doing as trying to, fix the sewers as cost effectively as possible. And, a big part of what we do is work on issues related to inflow and infiltration. So that's, how we help the rivers, I think. I think that was your question, right?
Yep. And how the people that you're interacting with on the sewer side, how do they think about it? Do they even think about rivers and what's happening, where their source of waters are, and where what you're dumping back in on the other side?
The cities and utilities that we work with, they're, to some degree motivated by fines and not having in the PR of having problems. So, any work that you guys do to highlight issues that cities are having in terms of, overflows, there are consent decrees that, third-party groups, probably like Friends of the River, that are helping to push, help drive, public knowledge and just forcing cities to do the work that they need to do.
Yeah, I think adding to that too, right? There's the regulatory pressure on businesses, on cities to drive change, but you know the old adage, shit rolls downhill. And so, you know, every water basin is at a low point. And so whether that's, you know, you've got rivers flowing down, you've got aquifers underneath, you've got the ocean that collects it all. And so every outfall, every wastewater treatment plant, right, is connecting eventually or directly to a receiving water body. And so, you know, if we're doing on-site treatment, we're reducing the load going into the sewer, which enables, you know, better treatment, less energy, cleaner water out of centralized infrastructure. We're catching leaks, we're catching, you know, these problems that can exist within the sewer line or the water line, so it doesn't permeate into the soil regions and then also find its way out into a receiving water body. And, you know, on the industrial side, for a lot of the wastewater that we manage, we can't go to a sewer. You know, the infrastructure says, no, we cannot take it. So these companies will truck it off site and land apply it. And of course, what happens when it rains, right? You get saturation runoff into receiving water bodies. And so, you know, and there's of course planning and, you know, you try to manage these things, but then it becomes a soil management issue, it becomes a water management issue, and all of it becomes a runoff issue. And so, you know, the best offense is a good defense.
And you know, I'll add something, which is that, you know, we often talk about water and water scarcity, and we don't have access to enough water, but you know, we have plenty of water. I think everyone knows that there's only a finite amount of water that exists. It's less of a water supply issue, it's more of a water management issue. You know, I come from Israel, where we're recycling 90% of all of our wastewater, whereas in this country we're, I think, still at about 1, 2, 3%, which A, disheartening, but B, for me, I'm optimistic because that means we can get to here, we're here, so there's a lot to do. And I think, you know, we can do a lot more to make sure that we're putting less strain and less pressure on our natural water supplies. We can make sure that we're able to conserve our natural water supplies and our river ecosystems by doing things a lot smarter. And I think, you know, especially what Matt and Aaron are doing is bringing smart technology to an industry that is very much not the smartest. You know, I think we often talk about how the water industry is still run by the clipboard army. And what I mean by that is we still have water meters where someone has to physically go with a clipboard, check it, and write it down. Well, why in every other industry can we put smart sensors and have smart approaches to, you know, something as simple as reading a meter? And the exciting thing, and sort of all of us come from Imagine H2O, is there is this massive wave of water innovation coming in. And I think it's going to contribute to many issues, including making sure that we're not discharging industrial waters or storm overflows into our river ecosystems.
And I think you make an excellent point, Aaron, because when you say it's not smart, we don't even have meters in stormwater and sewage within our streets. Like the EPA has some recommendations that we can use chalk to draw on the outside of an outfall, and then we measure after a rain event to see if water flowed through it. We don't know how much water is moving through. We don't know where it's going. We don't know where it's coming from. We have all these issues, and all of the things we're trying to fix is like a blanket approach to solve stormwater and to solve runoff and to reduce phosphorus or nutrients or other issues going into the waterways. But we can't even target the highest need areas first because we don't know. So all of the work that we're doing helps us target those areas and then implement the fixes that we need to treat the water and help either release it as clean water to receiving bodies or allow it to recharge into groundwater.
Runoffs come up a couple of times now. Oriana, in the past when we've talked, everybody's driven up and down I-5 and seen all the dairy farms and the, let's call it these shit piles that the cows are living on and the runoff that comes off of those. Is it going to be possible to use your technology to actually clean that up so it's not running off into the streams or anything along there?
That's the goal, absolutely. I mean, open lagoons has been the solution for manure management for as long as we've had water infrastructure and large-scale farming. And that's the problem. That's where most of the smell is coming from. That's where most of the emissions are coming from in the farming industry. And of course, if they're unlined ponds, right, that eventually makes its way into a water cycle. And so the issue there is an issue of cost. I mean, there have been technologies around for years to alleviate those lagoons, but they're very costly. And so again, kind of back to the regulation side, when a farmer is operating on a 6% margin, and an open lagoon is the cheapest thing that they've got to manage their manure and make sure it's not flowing directly into a stream, but at least it's contained, they're not gonna be changing anything until either somebody gives them the money to do so or tells them they have to do so, and then here's some solutions. Until there is a very cost-effective solution, right, that they can plug and play and make money off of it. And so that's really where kind of the manure management area is driving toward is, okay, you need a simpler solution than anaerobic digestion because you have a 50% fail rate at farms using conventional anaerobic digestion. It's just too complicated, too massive, too expensive to install. And you know, there has to be another reason to do this. You need the water back. You got to be able to bring it back into your agricultural process, or you need the energy back. You need something to offset the initial infrastructure cost. And whether that's subsidized or, you know, is just affordable, right? That's really what we're trying to get to. But technology's there. We have to make it available, accessible, and permitted so that it can be adopted.
So along those lines then, in terms of the permitting and acceptance and price of doing things, do the state and municipalities, are they an assist or are they a block in terms of you getting your technology out there and both accepted and adopted? We heard trust going in, but obviously the policymakers are a big deal in the water area. California, let's see, when Friends of the River was born in 70, I think it was 73. There it is, 73. There were 20 million people in California. Now we've got 40 million. We've got less water coming down because of climate change. As near as I can tell, the policies haven't really changed other than who's fighting to get subsidized water to become more of a ag basket for the world. So how do you deal with the policy folks and get them to understand what needs to happen and how this stuff gets adopted, given that people don't want to actually price water for what it's worth?
Do we have another 5 hours to talk about this? I'll say my piece. I'm sure everybody has got something to contribute here. Transparency, talking, letting everybody know what this is, how it works. And, you know, from a regulatory and permitting perspective, and I'm sure Epic Clean Tech and, you know, folks that are working more in the residential, commercial, and stormwater space face this much more than we do. But the reality is, like, we do have a system that is plugging into a non-sewered community. But in order for us to actually operate that system, we need to get permitted by the city, the county, and meet all of the APA regs for the state. And in order to get the final permit, right, it takes a year of 24/7 data collection. And then that only counts for San Bernardino County. So I can take that same system, same process, same everything, and I have to go through it all over again if I sell it into LA County or Napa or Sonoma. And so that is so costly and cost prohibitive, really, for a new business, an early stage company to be able to sell. And then your gatekeepers now to get into those counties are the big engineering firms. And they don't necessarily have an incentive to bring in new technologies. And so that becomes a challenge. And I'm gonna let it go for others.
I'll give kind of a different point of view. I don't know if it's different or not, but we've talked with, you know, state regulators, a little more local regulators, and we found them to be supportive and helpful, but they don't see it as their mandate to specifically tell, you know, cities how to maintain their system. They tell them you must maintain them, you can't have overflows, but they don't want to be in the business of telling them specifically what to do. And I'm sure there's good political and legal reasons as to why they take that attitude. We have had good reception from them, and we've, you know, had discussions trying to educate them, but really, I mean, we haven't really pushed in that direction. We've really tried to look at it from a value proposition strategy where we're not trying to force regulators to show off our technology. We're just trying to show cities that say, hey, we can cut your costs in half for this this activity, and telling the contractors that are doing the work for the cities where the cost eventually flows through that, hey, we can do this much cheaper, and eventually the costs make it back to the cities.
So, I have a comment on just on the regulatory side of things. So I come from federal politics, and what I'll say, there's always been some level of sort of agreement, disagreement among the political parties. And sort of when I first got into politics, there was sort of a Venn diagram of where Republicans and Democrats were going to agree. There was always an overlap. Today, that doesn't exist. The political polarization, I think if anyone watched debates last night, you can get a sense of just how far apart we are. And for that reason, I think Matt touched upon it. All of our focus in terms of our legislative work is all on the local and then some on the state level. And because frankly, I think cities are going to be the catalyst and the centers for change, especially when it comes to these really regulatory, slow moving things like utilities and specifically water. Just to give one example of sort of what can happen if you have all these different stakeholders working together is what we did in San Francisco. So we actually passed, so previously it was really difficult to do water recycling in a building because it didn't exist in the plumbing code. The public health people couldn't sign off on it, this person, that person, and you had a problem just getting anything done. So we worked with then Supervisor Scott Wiener, now State Senator Scott Wiener, who I think frankly has been a champion on water issues. And we passed a law in San Francisco that any new large buildings over 250,000 square feet have to do on-site water recycling. And the premise of it is, why are we still using fresh water from Hetch Hetchy to flush our toilets when we can be doing that on-site? And there was an element of the developers saying like, oh, great, one more thing that San Francisco is trying to make us do. But then when you show them, well, look, it's new, we're going to teach you about it, but ultimately, in 3 to 5 years, you're going to be saving money, and over 10 years, you're going to be saving a few $1 million. All of a sudden, they were all the biggest climate activists in the world. And that's sort of the way we're going to have to do these types of things. And it's going to be sort of a layered approach. But if you can align the economic incentives with these approaches and show people that, once we sort of get past these initial obstacles, and then it's a win-win for everyone, it's creating jobs, it's saving people money, and it's good for the environment. It's possible. It just takes time, and it takes a lot of work. And, water is a massive, massive industry. And as Oriana said, there's a lot of stakeholders at play. And I think there's sort of inertia for innovation to not happen. But, you get enough Epic Clean Tech storm sensors, SewerAIs, and Aquacycles coming in and sort of chipping away at that, it'll move. And I think it's starting now in a big way.
Aaron, how about on the sensor front? Because unless we can know how much water is moving where, it's tough to manage it per se.
Absolutely. It's really interesting actually, because we don't do chemical analyses, but it comes up a lot that our customers want to monitor phosphorus or metals or whatever it is that is going into their water bodies. And they're monitoring the effectiveness of different applications to reduce the concentrations by modeling. It's mostly done by modeling, and they'll grab samples at a one time, but they have no context for that. So we're actually starting and looking at a number of projects where our system's deployed, so we have real-time flow monitoring, and then they collect their phosphorus samples and say it's 200 milligrams per liter. We actually know how many liters that is. So it gives you an idea of how much contamination is actually moving through using real data, not modeled data. And that helps them target, again, their applications. So that's one aspect of it. Another thing that was really interesting when we started selling to cities is that a couple of years ago, we were talking about, we are a stormwater company and we monitor stormwater and we can help you with your stormwater and meet the regulations. And they say, we don't have a stormwater problem. We have our stormwater management plan. We check off the list every day or every year. We file with the EPA. We might have some fines, but it's not that big of a deal. We don't have a stormwater problem. And we say, well, what about urban flooding? They're like, oh my gosh, we have a terrible urban flooding problem. So we went from saying, stormwater is the #1 cause of water pollution in urban areas to stormwater is the #1 cause of urban flooding, which is basically saying stormwater is the #1 cause of stormwater. But the the story that it allows people to tell themselves is very different. And we can have the same solutions and have the same impact. It's just phrased differently based on their interpretation of the regulations.
So if we look back across an analogous area and say what happened in California for air quality and energy, they created CARB, the California Resources Board, which became the point for licensing technology and what technology could be utilized and measurement standards, et cetera, et cetera. Would something like that be useful on the water side, do you think, for getting you guys reduced costs and easier to get adoption across counties or across municipalities? Or is it like Aaron was talking about, and you've just got to go build it in San Francisco and you've got to build it in LA and get this bottoms up, bubbling up kind of thing, and that's the only way it's going to work?
For what we do, because we don't do treatment, we don't really have a certification program that we can follow. So we've been more on the bottom up and sharing the vision of what we're trying to build with cities, and then they buy into that vision and they deploy a first pilot or a hotspot target area and then expand from there. So it's been one city at a time. And yeah, I don't know, that probably wouldn't help us, but I know it's valuable for like Oriana's company and the work that they do.
It definitely. I mean, if you've got so the California Energy Commission, right, is still extremely active in awarding grants for energy efficiency projects, for energy generation projects, and those projects are deployed across the state in a variety of different industries and markets. And that really drives innovation in the energy sector, right, and sustainability in energy. It would be awesome to have something like that in water. The challenge, though, that we see is that water is so regionally focused. It's very regionally managed, and you know, as Aaron had pointed to earlier, right, it's dealing with the specific city first, and then you can widen that scope. But it really, because your water quality is different, your water resource is different. You know, in Southern California, we're importing from Hetch Hetchy, but we're also trying to do a lot more desalination and, you know, trying to increase that water security, but that changes the whole water chemistry of what's distributed through the city and how all of that infrastructure has to be managed. And so while grants, subsidies, and a statewide initiative to drive innovation across the state for water technology specifically would be amazingly helpful, it's always going to have a local spin.
Sure. Aaron or Matt?
I don't really know enough to comment that intelligently, but what I'll say is, like, sewers and storms are underground and like people don't see them. You know, I think Aaron had a quote before, but like, it's not something people think about, and it's going to be something that's difficult from that sense to kind of pull together a legislative agenda that a lot of people can get behind, such as like clean air, you know, that people breathe the air and they, especially right now, you can really feel it. So my thought is, you know, it's a huge education piece that we need to go in to make that effective.
To that end, what originally got me interested in water, and I tried to get General Electric into the water business back in the dark ages, was after reading an EPA report that 50% of US municipalities have water that doesn't meet the EPA requirements for drinkability. And it's gotten nothing but worse since then. As you say, it's a thing people don't want to think about, but there's what's pieces to that. It's everybody's getting nailed, and it's a stretch, but I suspect downstream we're going to learn that some of the environmental toxins that are being delivered via water are driving cancer and any number of other conditions that we're experiencing more and more.
I think on that point, there's actually a new book that came out by a man named Seth Siegel called Troubled Water, which addresses just this point. You know, I think it's become common knowledge, especially in the water industry, because we talk about it all the time, but, you know, Flint, Michigan is not a one-off. I think there's probably thousands of Flints going on at this moment that either we do know about and aren't being talked about, or that we're going to discover. And I think there's a lot of companies that are already doing this work of, bringing smarter technology to come and doing, real-time monitoring of this water quality and showing us exactly what is happening in our water. And then, it's a problem. And I think Flint was the one silver lining of Flint was that it raised the profile of water issues in a way that we haven't seen in a long time. But in many ways, I'll be the first to say, I think our water, wastewater, the people who work in our utilities we should hold them in the same esteem that we do with first responders, because they're working 24/7 to provide a basic function for all of us. If the power goes out, we all have flashlights and we'll be fine. I mean, think about if the water goes out, I think there's going to be pandemonium. I mean, what can you do without water? I mean, effectively nothing. And it is an issue. And I think, frankly, we need more focus on it. I think there's 50 times more federal R&D going into energy than there is into water, and that's a problem.
Yep. To that end, and not being able to do anything, I would argue that the wars we've seen wrapped around oil are child's play compared to what's coming in terms of wars wrapped around water and accessibility of it as things change and heat up and it's not in the right place, or somebody's got rights for it and somebody else doesn't, kind of thing. What's the right way to measure success in thinking about addressing water issues, and how you view your business's success? What are the outcomes that you're looking for?
Who do you want to go first? I think we can all.
I'll give you the entrepreneur's outlook. Like, obviously if my business is successful, but kind of like the statistic that I like to to show to people is to say, hey, pick a city, the city you live in, and just Google, San Francisco sewer rate increase, and like look for news articles, because like every city, their sewer rates are like going up by 8 to 12% every year for like the last 3 years, and it's projected to go on forever. So like, the way I think about it is like, if we can get that cost to like level off, that's like success. But that's a very business aspect, a way of looking at it. So
Fair enough.
yeah.
Yeah, well, what I'll say is that, I want to live with the amount of technology and the amount of smart people and frankly smart regulators that we have. We shouldn't be reliant on the weather to produce all of our water needs. Meaning, we frankly shouldn't be suffering in droughts the way that we do. And I think part of that comes to the fact that, we're only recycling these sort of embarrassingly low percentages of water when we can be doing so much more. And it's a combination of technology. It's about innovative financial models. I mean, the same way we unlocked solar with, power purchase agreements, we need to be doing more interesting finance in the water sector, and we need smarter regulations. We need to find a way to get people to work across the aisle on something as critical as water. And so for me, I want to live in a world where if it doesn't rain for a few years, we're not going to have, entire cities in Central California who are reliant on bottled water. So I think for me, success is to make sure that, everyone has the benefit of having always access to water, and for it to be treated like it is, which is a basic human right.
Aaron?
We at Storm Sensor, our mission is to create thriving communities. We believe that water is foundational to doing that. And we also believe that historically, the wealthier areas in a lot of communities have safe water, and they don't have flooding, and they don't have the contamination. They're not subject to heat island impacts. So one of the reasons that we have released our initial solution at such a low cost is because we want to kind of democratize that water data and use data, not demographics, to solve these problems. And by being able to actually capture that information and prove that there are areas that actually need this more than others, to kind of use that to encourage, with a great deal of enthusiasm, cities to do the right thing and spread the wealth amongst their entire community, because that's the only way that you can possibly have an equitable and sustainable town. That's one aspect. I think another aspect is that we look at so much of how our cities run in individual component parts, when really it's all one big aspect. And you can't understand how the entire thing works if you just look at one part of it. So understanding how our water infrastructure impacts homeowners and commercial properties and traffic when there's flooding and sea level rise and all these other issues that we're dealing with, while at the same time we have heavier rain events and more frequent flooding. And then that water, just in dry areas especially, washes away. So there's no effort to retain it and treat it as this valuable resource that it is. In many cases, it's treated as, well, it's called wastewater, for goodness sake. So taking that stigma away from it and being able to treat it and reuse it and recycle it, like Aaron was talking about, I think is hugely valuable, and we want to help. I think making a difference and making it easy to see that all water is connected and all of that benefits a community as a whole is important to us at our company.
Absolutely. Oriana?
Yeah, I agree with everything everybody just said. I think, you know, the concept of one water, right? Wastewater is water. You just got to take the stuff out of it and then reuse it. And all water, every single drop that we use on a daily basis is already recycled. It's just a matter of how you look at it, right? There is not new water being generated, right? We have a fixed water cycle, but there is a plenty as long as we can keep it locally where we need it. And so, you know, there's a lot of issues that we have to solve. I think from a success point of view, it's being able to improve that water stewardship from an industrial perspective, a city perspective, a residential perspective. That comes from education, behavior change, valuing water, and understanding that it is one water and how precious a resource it really is.
Absolutely. Thank you. So we're coming up on our end time, so I don't get hit by Brittany. Thanks to everybody. Interesting conversation. I'd love to keep it going for another 5 hours, but I suspect what audience we have, we would lose promptly. But we're in the process of adopting a new strategic plan for the next 50 years for FOR. And in that, we're also putting up a new website that is being worked on by the team that did Years of Living Dangerously, which has a big water component in the work that they've done. If anybody hasn't seen it, it's worth seeing. There were 2 seasons of it. But to that end, we'll have resources on that site that tie to these companies and others that are doing really innovative stuff in water, that we're going to help do our best to help educate people and get linkages to it and help drive adoption back up into the municipal and state level if possible. Because the only way we're going to get pressure off the rivers is to get these kinds of technologies into the marketplace and start changing habits that people haven't wanted to change for decades. We've got the California River Awards event coming up on November 12th. So hopefully we'll see some people there. Charlie Sinner, who's another board member, is pulling that program together for everybody. Again, it's going to be virtual this year, which will be a novel approach, but hopefully it works well. What else was there, Ravi?
I think that is the kind of main big pitch that you need to do for the CRA. But in terms of the panel, I think we're going to open it up to the Q&A now, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct, Brittany?
Yes, and folks can put their questions in the Q&A.
I've been watching. I haven't seen anything come in.
That's because we answered every single question anyone could possibly have about water.
There you go. And so the perfect price for water is what? Going once, going twice.
Jeff, I'll ask you, sorry. I mean, like if you could pinpoint, one most important problem or one biggest challenge, what would you point towards?
I think ultimately it becomes a pricing problem. That there's so much hidden subsidization in the price of water. It gets used in a lot of ways that don't make economic sense or policy sense. So going back to the pet peeve that I opened up front, with using alfalfa or growing alfalfa with field flooding down in a desert doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And it can be grown anywhere. It gets worse when we're shipping it to China because the containers are free going that direction. And so we've got a scarce resource that everybody's fighting over and trying to get subsidized. And so if you had legitimate pricing on the water, the farmers would be making different decisions in terms of what they were producing and how much they were producing. A question popped up.
You do have a question here, yeah. So Richard actually from the audience is asking, thanks for the great discussion about some very interesting technologies. Historically, water conservation has resulted not in more water in river, but in more acres being irrigated. How can we ensure that we don't make the same mistakes this time?
I'll give my answer, which frankly, Jeff, I think you've already answered, which is that I think the biggest determinant to sort of the irresponsible use of water now is just based on the artificial pricing. I think if there's one thing we've learned, one of the best ways to change people's behavior, unfortunately, or it just is what it is through economics, is through pricing it smartly. Because I think we're not incentivized now to use it in a smart way, and especially when it comes to the ag users. And I think the other big piece that I would advocate for, and again, this goes to sort of the adventure Oriana mentioned, sort of when it comes to moving from city to city and county to county, is that our regulatory structure is so fragmented that it's impossible not just to help new technologies to get into play, but to make any sort of big decisions as a state when you have a million, don't quote me on this number, but I think it's something like 1,500 different sort of authorities making big decisions in California when it comes to how we manage our water and what decisions are made with the water. And you have to talk to the coastal folks and these folks and that folks. And so until we get some sort of consolidation, I think we're going to have a too many cooks in the kitchen problem. And so I think it's pricing, I think it's consolidation over sort of who we're going to make these decisions that are really going to get to the issues that Richard brought up. I think all of us are going to have some impact on it, but I think where all of us can have a bigger impact is in banding together and actually forming effectively lobbying strategies. And I think that is a place where the innovators can partner with the nonprofits and with the city governments to actually advocate for those changes.
Water rights is a big one, and how water rights change throughout the state. That's huge and not well understood, but that dictates a lot of where water goes, right? And that is very local.
Yeah, the frightening thing is there's 2.5 times the water rights in California committed than there is water, dating back to, I think it's 1860 or some such number. A little bit crazy. So one just popped up. What can we do to help you guys scale your technologies?
I'm sure we all have funding rounds open.
I think that's a question for Sandhill Angels more than.
Well, also awareness, right? Spread the word. There are solutions out there. If you know of problems that need to be solved, we want to learn about that. We want to be able to adjust our approach, our solutions, our deployments to be able to engage with as many customers as possible, enlighten as many regulators as we can. The network is powerful. And so, getting the word out about what's available really helps us on a lot of different levels.
Aaron, there's another question that popped up here about water reuse, being amazed that 91%, I think was the number, was recycled in Israel.
Yeah.
So what
Yeah.
kind of things are they doing that we haven't even contemplated?
Well, I think one, you know, from its inception, you know, as a modern state in 1948, water, I mean, frankly, before that, water has always been a sort of a a matter of national security. I mean, it affects, you know, without water, there can be no people living there, and it's a water stressed region. So from the earliest days, water has been essentially run by the government. So the Israeli government controls water. I mean, there's a joke, which is not really a joke, but in Israel, if you have a bucket on your roof and water falls into that bucket, that water belongs to the state. And because of that, water is actually priced much higher. So that they are actually, you know, whereas we are just charging for the cleaning and transportation of water, in Israel, you actually pay for the product. So water is priced much higher. People are much more responsible when it comes to water. But they reuse water at a national scale. So it's not just a lot of different buildings, but they're actually treating it at their central treatment plants and sending that water, most of it to irrigation. And they're actually doing a lot of what we call fertigation. They're actually putting all those nutrients in the water right into their crops and doing amazing things, you know, being able to water plants with brackish water as an example. So you have these, you know, and Aaron mentioned the book by Seth Siegel, Let There Be Water. He tells this story better than I ever could. But, you know, Israel's at the top, recycling about 90%. Spain's, I think, in second at about 35%. We have the US are hovering around 1% to 2%. So it's a glass half full, half empty, to use a water pun. That, you know, it's unfortunate, but we have a lot to do, and there's a lot of room for improvement, which, you know, I think all of us here are doing our best to contribute to that.
The Attorney General, who's going to be the honoree at the CRA Awards, Becerra, is in the midst of a litigation trying to stop $2 to $3 billion going to enlarge the Shasta Dam right now, which kind of plays into that line, and trying to resist the opening up water and letting it flow freely south into westlands, etc. So, any other questions? I'm not seeing any others. I'd say it's a wrap then.
I think that's it. Yeah. Well, I just want to lastly congratulate and thank all of our panelists for being here. I think a few of the takeaways just before we do sign off on the call. I really love this quote that I think, Oriana, you mentioned around all water is connected, the kind of this one water idea. I think if we can kind of take that away, that would be really, really great. Aaron from Epic Clean Tech, who is helping water with water reuse and reusing wastewater. We talked a lot about legislators and regulators just dealing with implications on public health. You guys deal with, you know, technology in these high-rise buildings that could potentially affect, you know, hundreds of people that are living there, which is amazing work. And I really love this quote that I think I heard today on the flush and forget attitude. You know, you don't remember that the tap is on. You don't really know where it's coming from, where it's going to. And Oriana from Aquacycle, just with your technology on the reuse around water, industrial applications, and just everything you're doing with BET. The two books that were actually mentioned, which was the Seth Siegel book, Troubled Water, and Aaron, the book that you suggested around Let There Be Water.
Also Seth Siegel.
That's also Seth Siegel. Awesome.
Yeah.
And then I just wanted to, lastly, thank Matt from SewerAI and Aaron from Storm Sensor, and to also Imagine H2O, the Water Innovation Accelerator, which all of you are a part of. And lastly, to FOR, the Friends of the River, for hosting this Riverside Chat, and to my partner in crime, Jeff Depew, as well.
Thank you much, everybody. To be continued.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.